Within that, also my call to ministry. And for a lot of people, maybe for most pastors, ministers that are called, they're interwoven. But I'll try to treat each of them a little separately. Both of them, though, began really in the church that I was raised in, the church that raised me in faith. I grew up in Houston. I grew up in a suburb in Houston. And it was really in that church that raised me in faith and would later affirm my call to ministry. And my parents and I have 4 siblings, but they're quite a bit older than me. And so I kind of grew up as an only child. And my parents and I were very faithful to go to church on Sundays. We were there very often. But even though we were there really every Sunday, I wouldn't say that we were very involved beyond that. And faith wasn't something that we talked a lot about in my house growing up, especially not when I was really young. And so it was really the local church that really raised me in faith and taught me just kind of the core beliefs of our Christian faith, taught me what it means to follow Jesus, taught me about fellowship, kind of all of our basics of faith. It was really that church. And when I was 8 years old, I had at that point been taught by Sunday school teachers and by volunteers and pastors and children's pastors, just the truth that God loves us. And I felt, in my 8-year-old self that I really loved the Lord back. And so at VBS one summer, I decided that I wanted to make a decision about that. That's what Baptists do. We make a decision about our faith. And so I asked if I could be baptized when I was 8. And, I was really young, but I believed that was a really sincere experience for me. And so I was baptized in the church gym because we didn't have a sanctuary yet. And so I just remember being pulled up out of the water and looking out on a basketball court. So I was baptized as an 8-year-old and then just continued to grow up in that church and continued to be taught and formed in the ways of Christ. Was really well loved there. And the local church has continued to be a really big part of my Christian pilgrimage. I went to a good church when I was in college and in seminary, and I've done internships in really great churches and just learned a lot about how churches function, how they fellowship, different ways that Christians learn and they live out their faith. And so I've been very privileged by that. And so it really just all began for me in that church in Sugar Land. And really that's kind of where my Christian pilgrimage began. And again, it would continue in the churches that I was in college and seminary. And also just going to college and seminary was a big part of my faith. I studied Christian studies at UMHB, and then I would go to seminary. And so, you're asking a lot of questions, and you're writing papers, and you're really engaged in Christian thinking when you're in those environments, obviously. And so that ended up having a really great impact, I guess, on my Christian pilgrimage. And it taught me to, ask big questions and to think deeply about faith and to know that, being a disciple is what we do with our lives. It's always how we think about the world, how we engage with, thoughts. It's how we engage with other people. And so college and seminary, I think, really just deepened work that first church really started for me. And the churches I was in there, deepened it that initial church really did begin in me. So it's really kind of my Christian pilgrimage. And then within that, in that same church, is really where I began to feel a call to ministry. And it really just began because I loved church. It was really simple for me. And I think one thing that I felt very blessed by in being called to pastor is that I do believe that the Lord has called me, and I feel convicted about that. But I also just feel like it's what I love, and that's been a really great blessing. There are some prophets in our Old Testament that are called to things that they weep about, and I don't feel like that's been my experience, So I've just been really grateful to be called to something that I really do love. And so I think that was really the beginning of my call. I just liked church. I liked learning about faith. I wanted to grow in my relationship with God. And so when I was about 15, I began to think about where I wanted to go to college, so what I wanted to do with my life, which I think that describes my personality a little bit. was kind of trying to plan for those things. And so I went to one of my youth pastors and just asked him what a life of ministry looked like. And he explained it to me. And I felt like in that meeting and kind of from that meeting, I really began to feel convicted that the Lord was calling me to this. And so that was kind of my internal call. And as I grew up in that church and as I went to churches in undergrad and seminary, that call's been affirmed along the way. And I've been grateful for that. And so I just continued to grow in it as I was in high school. And then as I got to college, it kind of began to fine-tune a little bit. You know, when I was young, I really felt called to just church ministry kind of in general. I really loved the church, felt called to lead and to serve within the church. And then when I went to college, I took a class, actually it was Bill Carroll's class, funny enough, called Intro to Pastoral Ministry. And, you know, I just remember sitting in that class thinking, if you could make the class of exactly what I wanted to do, it would be this one. So I really just enjoyed the conversations, and I thought I'm interested in these different aspects of pastoring and these different aspects of this job. And that's when I really began to feel called to be a lead pastor, a senior pastor. And yeah, again, I think one of the things I've been really grateful for is to have that encouraged and affirmed in the churches that I've been a member in along the way. So yeah, that would be my pilgrimage and my call to ministry. So I guess if you have any questions, take them now. My hobbies. Yeah. Well, I like to organize my hobbies. I would say that I have outdoor hobbies and indoor hobbies. So my outdoor hobbies, I grew up in a family that likes camping. So I don't get to do it very often, but I really do love camping. We spent a lot of time in Colorado when I was in high school in the summers. We would go backpacking. So I really do love doing that. I just don't do it very often. I also grew up with a dad who, he loves his family and he loves the Lord, but like right underneath that, he loves fishing. So I just grew up fishing constantly, and so it's become something that I really love. And my parents just retired to the coast. They live in Rockport, just by Corpus Christi. And so we go saltwater fishing every time I go home. So I really do love doing that. I also like to garden a lot, so I enjoy doing that. I haven't really ever had a huge one, so I've just always had tons of pots outside my door, but I enjoy doing that a lot. And then my indoor hobbies. It's a little cheesy for a 27-year-old to like to do embroidery, but I love to embroider. So I really enjoy doing that. That was one of my pandemic hobbies. Got really into embroidering, so I've done some tea towels along the way. And let's see what else. I really like to read. You know, I grew up with parents that really love to read, and so I just enjoy doing that a lot. And I also like to bake quite a bit. It was also something I did a lot in the pandemic, for good or ill. So yeah, I would say those are my hobbies. Yeah. My favorite author? I would say my favorite fiction author is Amy Tan. I've read all of her books. Just I've always appreciated the way she described families. So I've learned a lot about maybe my own family from her writing. So I love Amy Tan.
What's your favorite pet?
My favorite pet? My parents have this big lab, pit bull, something else mix called Seamus. And I love that dog. So I wish they would give me Seamus, but my dad will not. So yeah, that's my favorite pet.
I think this goes with the hobby question, but how do you take care of yourself? And how do you recognize that that's something that you need?
Yeah. I think it depends a little bit on what's going on. You know, so when I was doing my research degree, it was just me and the books. So it was a lot of quiet time, which I was comfortable with, but it was a lot of it. And so I think based on that time, I knew that it was actually the reason I ended up moving back to Waco, because I came home for Christmas in the middle of the research degree, and I couldn't go back to Scotland. And so I lived with my parents for about 5 months, and that was good, but after about 5 months, my parents and I both agreed I needed a social life. So I ended up moving back to Waco, and so I think that was the time where I knew that I needed that. And so I think, I've been really blessed to have some really caring friends, and I think that's a big way in which I take care of myself. Is I've always had friends that just felt like loved me really well, and so just chatting with them, going on walks with them, whatever it is, And then when my life is, very busy and there's a lot going on and it's maybe not as quiet, I think trying to find those opportunities to just garden or embroider or read, And then, I do think a really big one for me, regardless of kind of the season of life that I'm in, is trying to have a consistent time every day where I'm just quiet before the Lord. I am a morning person, but I'm not very lucid in the morning. But I've tried to start doing that quite a bit more, and so I think that's proven to be something that's important to me, is having that every morning. It's stabilizing and centering. So yeah.
Do you get to see your family often?
I do, yeah. Living in Waco, they're only about 4.5 hours away. So I do see them pretty frequently, and they're good about coming up, and I think, in this next phase of life, it will be more challenging probably for me to travel, and they know that, and I think they're more than willing to come up, and it's, they've retired, so that works out. And I'm pretty close with my siblings. They live, further away for the most part, but I get to see them every once in a while. So yeah.
Maddie, is there any particular thing that excites you about the possibility of coming to this church? Have you begun to think about things in the middle of the night and whatever, that if I get there, I'm going to do this or that or whatever?
Yeah.
You don't need to be specific, but but I just want to know if you were thinking about it and if there was anything that really excited you about this church.
Yeah. I think the first thing I was told about this church, and I would say the first thing I experienced from the committee, was just a warmth, and so I think I'm excited to get to know everyone, and I think hopefully I think that is my first goal, just to get to know you all. So I think that's just initially the thing I'm excited about the most. I think that foundationally is the most important thing at first. So that's what I'm excited about. Oh, sorry.
Yes, that's right. Go ahead, Kathy. In several churches that I worked in, pastor took the morning time to prepare for his sermon.
Mm-hmm.
So there was nobody that had appointments at that time, because that's when he was in the office.
Yeah.
And then the afternoon is when he had appointments. Do you have a system like that, or would you like to prepare a system like that?
Yeah.
Either do your studying in the afternoon or at home preparing, or a system?
I don't have a system. I think my sermon writing process has always been while I've been in school, for the most part. And so I think for me, or when I've had a different job, and so I'm doing, kind of supply preaching, where I've preached a couple of times for the church that I'm working in now, but it's not as frequent. And so I don't really have a system yet, and I don't know what that will be. But just to say at the first bit, as I'm figuring it out, feel free to just stop by whenever. I don't have a set time in mind of when I would and wouldn't prepare for that.
I have a follow-up to Larry's question as to how you take care of yourself. Since you would be our senior pastor and there's basically no staff, except me, that's ever present in the building on any regular basis, how do you have a network of folks that you can, besides us, that can help you to just help you process things so that you stay healthy as in your pastoral world too?
Yeah, I think that's one of the benefits of where I went to seminary, is I felt like I gained a few of those friends. I don't have like 10 of them, but I have like 3 and I think that's worked well for us. Those of us who are really close with each other, that we kind of process ministry together. I've processed the whole job search process with them. Because a year before, one of them went through it as well, so we were able to kind of help each other. And so I think I really have developed, I probably say 3 of those really close friendships of people in ministry in different, one of them is in a similar field of ministry, and 2 others are in different ones. One's a chaplain and one's a children's pastor. And that's been a great benefit, because they'll have a perspective that I just don't have. So, yeah, I've been very grateful for that.
Do you have a good sense of humor?
His face shows it.
You think so? I like to
Ding
laugh.
dong.
You'll need it.
I'd like to think so. Yeah.
So what do you call ground beef?
A cow with no legs.
There you go, you gotta
I usually hear it the other way.
I know, huh?
Confused. Yeah.
What do you call
Keep it on
ground
my
beef?
nose.
Cow with no legs.
I'm really impressed, I can't.
And they don't even have a bone, so that's good. I didn't mean to spoil you, but.
Any other questions? Should we
I
end
have
on
some
that?
embroidery that's unfinished if you ever get. I'll pass it on to you.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I think somebody said something the other day when we were talking, and it reminded me of a time that I was I worked at a church by myself, and I kept the door locked. And so I think that's something that you may need to work out with you. If you're up here studying by yourself, that it would be a good idea if you feel comfortable and know that to keep the door locked. I think,
We have a bell.
You're in your office studying, and that's my thinking.
Yeah, that's smart. Okay.
What do you think are some of these challenges that churches like ours are facing?
Well, I think I might have to spend some more time here before I answer that, but I think maybe right off the bat, I think there is an unfortunate perception that the bigger your church has and the bigger the budget you have, the better you are as a church. And I don't think that's the case. I think churches with less money have just as many resources, they're just different. And so I think that sometimes I see small churches feel very discouraged by their maybe lack of traditional resources or monetary or whatever else, but there's something to be offered here that other churches can offer, right? It's distinct, and it's distinct, I think, for a divine purpose, a particular purpose in temple. And so I think that's a big one. In this interview process, I've seen some smaller churches just kind of be discouraged, and when I interview with them and get to know them, I think you don't need to be discouraged, So I think that's a big one.
What types of music do you like inside and outside of church? Are you a music lover or one who doesn't care?
I do like music. I feel like I listen to the same things over and over again, which is probably not good, but I like a lot of folk music. That might be due in part to my childhood a bit. But yeah, I like a lot of folk music. I saw a lot of it with my dad recently, and that's a little more like country folk, but that's right up my alley. So, yeah.
Go ahead.
I don't. No, I'm not musically inclined really in any way. So I can kind of carry a tune, but just barely. Yeah.
Anything else? If not, we have plenty of time for you all to mingle and visit with Maddie on an individual basis. Yes?
Oh, no.
Are you just what? But Maddie, thank you so much for sharing that with us. And of course, as all of you know, she will be preaching tomorrow and do the call in the morning worship. So let me encourage you to be here for that. And those of you who are members to stay for the special call church conference immediately following the service. But let's just take a little more time for informal fellowship. But otherwise, thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you, Maddie.
This is 2025.
That's true.